My mother, God rest her soul, used to say there's a fine line between being kind and being a fool. For 73 years, I've tried to walk on the right side of that line. She taught me to love fiercely, to give generously, and to never, ever turn my back on family. But my mother never met my daughter-in-law. Jessica, light, turns out, is the harshest teacher. And it taught me a lesson my mother never could. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is for yourself. And sometimes, you have to be willing to walk away to save your own life. I'm sitting on my porch swing now, in a little rented house that smells of fresh paint and new beginnings. The petunias I planted last week are starting to bloom, splashes of defiant pink and purple against the dark soil. This small patch of earth is mine. This quiet is mine. It's a peace I fought for. Peace I almost died for. It all started, as so many troubles do, with a simple cup of coffee. A single cup that held more than just caffeine and cream. It held a choice. It held my future. And to understand how I ended up on this porch, with the sun on my face, you have to understand the life I left behind. You have to understand the events of that cold, gray Thursday morning. For 3 years, my world was defined by the four walls of my son Michael's house in Maple Creek, Ohio. After my husband, Robert, passed away, it seemed like the most logical thing in the world. Michael and Jessica were struggling with 2 young kids, busy careers, and a mortgage that was stretching them thin. "Mom, it would be such a help," Michael had said, his eyes full of earnest hope. "The kids adore you. It would be good for you, too. You shouldn't be alone." And so I moved in. I packed up the memories of my 40-year marriage, sold the house Robert and I had built together, and moved into the guest room at the end of their hallway. First, it was wonderful. My grandchildren, Isabel and Peter, were my light. I loved the feeling of being needed, of being part of a bustling family again. My days fell into a steady, predictable rhythm. My alarm would go off at 5:30 a.m. Long before the sun had a chance to wake the quiet suburban street. I'd slip out of bed, my joints protesting quietly, and make my way to the kitchen. The house would be still, shrouded in the blue-gray light of dawn. I'd start the coffee, the rich aroma filling the sterile, modern kitchen that never quite felt like home. It was Jessica's kitchen, all white granite, stainless steel, and cold, clean lines. I was just a permanent guest in it. By the time Michael came down at 6:30, his tie already askew, a cup of coffee would be waiting for him on the counter, just the way he liked it, black, 2 sugars. Then the kids would thunder down the stairs, and the morning chaos would begin. "Grandma, where are my soccer cleats?" Peter would yell. "Grandma, did you sign my permission slip?" Isabel would ask, already a teenager with 1 foot out the door. I'd make them breakfast, pack their lunches, and see them off to the school bus. A warm hug for each of them my reward. Jessica rarely emerged before 8. By then, the first wave of my work was done. The dishwasher would be humming, the counters wiped clean. She would glide in, looking effortlessly chic even in her silk robe, and pour herself a cup of the coffee I had made. "Morning, Eleanor," she'd say, her voice always a little too bright. "Anything I can do?" The question was always rhetorical. We both knew the answer. I did the laundry. I did the grocery shopping. I scrubbed the floors and dusted the furniture that wasn't mine. I did it all out of love. Love for Michael, who worked so hard and was too tired to see the subtle tensions simmering just beneath the surface of his perfect family life. Love for my grandchildren, who were my heart and soul. I told myself that my contribution, my work, was a form of love. But over time, a creeping unease began to settle in my bones. Jessica's suggestions started to sound more like criticisms. "Eleanor, I think you use too much fabric softener again. It irritates my skin." Or, "Maybe we should try organic milk for the kids. I read an article." I became a silent, unpaid employee in the home I was supposed to be a part of. I was the family's convenient, live-in solution. The bigger the favor, the less it is seen. I was so big a favor. I had become invisible. Which brings me to that Thursday. It was different from the start. I woke at my usual 5:30, but as I entered the kitchen, I was startled to see the light was already on. Jessica was standing by the counter, fully dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, her makeup perfectly applied. This was unheard of. On a typical day, she wouldn't be ready for work until at least 8:30. "Eleanor," she said, turning around with a smile that was dazzlingly white but didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're up early." I blinked, confused. "I'm always up at this time, dear." "Oh, right. Thor." She laughed. A short, brittle sound. "Well, sit down. Sit down. Let me get you your coffee this morning." My internal alarm, the one honed by decades of motherhood and observation, gave a faint ping. This was not normal. Jessica had never, in 3 years, made me a cup of coffee. I was the coffee maker. It was one of my unspoken duties. "That's very sweet of you, Jessica. But I can get it," I said, moving toward the machine out of habit. "Nonsense," she insisted, physically blocking my path with her body in a way that was meant to seem playful but felt like a command. "You do so much for us. For all of us. I was just thinking this morning how we don't appreciate you enough. So I want to make you a special cup. My treat." Special. The word hung in the air between us. I sat down cautiously at the kitchen island, my hands folded in my lap, and watched her. She moved with a strange, focused energy. She didn't use the coffee from the pot I'd already brewed. Instead, she took out a fresh bag of expensive, vanilla-flavored coffee, a brand I'd never seen before. She measured it carefully into the filter, her movements precise and deliberate. It was like watching a chemist in a lab. While the new pot brewed, she kept up a stream of cheerful chatter. She asked about my arthritis, commented on the weather, and told me about a new project at her marketing firm. It was all noise, a verbal smokescreen designed to distract me. I could feel it. The hairs on my arms stood up. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Finally, the coffee was ready. The vanilla scent was cloying, almost sickeningly sweet. She poured it into my favorite mug, the one with the faded bluebells that my grandchildren had given me for my 70th birthday. She added 2 spoonfuls of sugar and a generous pour of cream, just how I liked it. But she did it all without asking. She just knew. She placed the mug in front of me on the granite countertop. "Here you go, Eleanor," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "A little thank you for everything." And that's when I saw it. As I looked up to thank her, her mask slipped. For just a fraction of a second, the bright, polished smile vanished, and I saw the real Jessica. Her eyes were not warm or grateful. They were flat, cold, and calculating, like polished stones at the bottom of a frozen river. It was the look of someone watching an experiment, waiting for a result. A primal warning bell screamed in the deepest part of my soul. I stared down at the mug. The coffee's surface was a placid brown, but the smell was wrong. Beneath the overpowering vanilla, there was another scent, something sharp and faintly metallic. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. What was in this coffee? Was I losing my mind? Was this the paranoia of old age that Jessica sometimes hinted at when talking to Michael? Mom seems a little forgetful lately, don't you think? I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, my mind racing. I couldn't drink it, but I couldn't refuse it either. To refuse would be an accusation, an open declaration of war in a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. It would make me seem crazy, ungrateful. I lifted the mug, my hand trembling slightly. I brought it halfway to my lips, playing for time, my brain frantically searching for an escape. Just then, the back door flew open, and Jessica's mother, Helen, breezed in without knocking, as she often did. Helen was a whirlwind of a woman, loud, cheerful, and blissfully unaware of the undercurrents in her daughter's home. "Hello. Hello," she boomed, dropping her oversized purse on a chair. "I was on my way to the garden center and thought I'd pop in. Is that fresh coffee? I could use a cup." Jessica's head whipped around, and a flash of pure, undiluted annoyance crossed her face before being instantly replaced by her practiced smile. "Mom, what a surprise. Of course. Let me get you a mug." As Jessica turned her back to the cabinet, my body moved without a conscious command from my brain. It was pure animal instinct. My hand, as if with a mind of its own, nudged the Bluebell mug just an inch or two across the smooth granite countertop, moving it from my spot to the empty space where Helen was now standing, shrugging off her coat. It was a tiny, silent movement, a few inches of polished stone, but it was the most important move I had ever made in my life. Helen, chattering away about her plans to plant begonias, reached out and grabbed the nearest mug without a second thought. It was my mug. The special one. Vanilla. My favorite, she exclaimed, taking a large, noisy gulp. She drank half the cup before even taking a breath. Jessica turned back around, a fresh white mug in her hand. She froze for a second, seeing the Bluebell mug in her mother's hand. A flicker of something panic? Confusion? Crossed her features. But then she seemed to dismiss it. She probably assumed I had simply passed it to her. She filled the new mug from the same pot and placed it in front of me. "Here you go, Eleanor," she said, her eyes fixed on me, watching, waiting. I picked up the new cup. It was just coffee. Normal, hot, vanilla-flavored coffee. I took a small, tentative sip. My gaze locked on my daughter-in-law over the rim of the mug. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, I knew that cup of coffee was meant for me. And whatever was in it, her own mother had just drunk it. We sat there for a few minutes in a strange, suspended reality. Helen continued to talk, her voice filling the silence Jessica and I had created. She spoke of fertilizer and perennial blooms, completely oblivious to the silent, high-stakes drama unfolding across the kitchen island. I nodded and smiled, my muscles tight, my entire being focused on one thing, watching. I was a statue pretending to be a woman, the lukewarm coffee in my mug, a prop in this terrifying play. Jessica tried to act normal, but I could see the tension in the set of her jaw. She kept glancing at me, then at her mother, then back at me. She was an actress who had forgotten her lines, improvising poorly and hoping no one would notice. But I noticed. I saw everything. The first sign came about 20 minutes later. Helen, in the middle of a long story about a neighbor's prize-winning roses, suddenly stopped. She pressed a hand to her stomach. "Ooh," she said, her cheerful expression clouding over. "That coffee is not sitting right with me. Must be the vanilla. A bit too rich for me this early." Jessica's eyes darted to me. I kept my face a perfect mask of neutral concern. "Are you all right, Helen?" I asked, my voice steady. I don't know," Helen stammered. A fine sheen of sweat had appeared on her forehead. She looked pale, her skin suddenly waxy under the kitchen's harsh recessed lighting. "I feel dizzy." She tried to stand up but swayed on her feet. "Whoa." She gripped the edge of the granite counter, her knuckles turning white. "My stomach. Oh, my God." And then it began. A violent wave of nausea hit her, and she retched, barely managing to turn away from the island. She stumbled toward the sink, her body convulsing with violent, dry heaves. The sounds were horrifying, guttural and raw. "Mom!" Jessica cried out, rushing to her side. But the cry was a beat too late. It lacked the sharp, immediate terror of a daughter watching her mother fall ill. It was the panicked cry of a criminal whose plot had gone horribly, spectacularly wrong. Helen collapsed to the floor, curling into a fetal position on the cold tiles. She was moaning now. A low, pained sound. Her body began to tremble, her limbs jerking in small, uncontrollable spasms. "What's happening?" Jessica shrieked, looking wildly around the room as if the answer might be written on the walls. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. "I'm calling 911. It must have been the shrimp salad she ate last night. She told me it tasted funny." The lie was so blatant, so desperate, that it was almost comical. She was already building her defense, creating a narrative to cover her tracks. But as she frantically spoke to the dispatcher, her eyes met mine over her mother's shaking form. In that moment, I saw no concern, no love, no daughterly fear. I saw the raw, primal terror of a cornered animal. It was the look of being caught. I remained seated. I did not move. I just watched her, my expression unreadable. And in that silent, terrible exchange, the truth was laid bare between us. She knew that I knew. The invisible war had just become brutally visible. And her own mother was the first casualty. The paramedics arrived in a scream of sirens that shattered the morning peace of Maple Creek. They worked quickly, their movements efficient and professional. They asked questions, and Jessica answered them, spinning her tale of bad seafood and a sensitive stomach. I remained silent, a quiet old woman in the corner, an irrelevant fixture. They never even looked at me. Why would they? I was just the grandmother, the live-in help. As they loaded Helen onto the gurney, she was conscious but weak, her face a ghastly shade of gray. "My stomach is on fire," she whispered, her eyes wide with pain and confusion. They wheeled her out, and Jessica followed, clutching her purse, playing the part of the devoted, worried daughter. Before she left, she glanced back at me one last time. Her face was a storm of fear and fury. I had done this by simply existing, by simply not drinking the coffee. I had ruined everything. The house fell silent. The abrupt absence of noise was more jarring than the sirens had been. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. On the counter, my untouched mug of coffee sat next to Jessica's, both now cold. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady, and walked over to the sink. Helen's vomit was still there. Bitter, acidic stain. I turned on the water and began to clean, my movements slow and robotic. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I did not sleep. The image of Helen on the floor, of Jessica's face, of the innocent Bluebell mug, played on a loop in my mind. The shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an accident. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchildren, had tried to poison me. She had wanted me gone, not just out of her house, but out of the world. And a terrifying question followed. Why? As the dark hours ticked by, I started to connect the dots, retracing the last 3 years, searching for the breadcrumbs I had missed. I thought back to the beginning. When I first moved in, Jessica had been the picture of a welcoming daughter. We'd have long talks. She'd ask for my advice on recipes, on parenting. "You're such a natural, Eleanor," she used to say. "I don't know what we'd do without you." When did it change? It wasn't one single event. It was a slow erosion, a gradual chilling of the air. Started with small things. The way she would refold the laundry I had just folded. The way she'd correct me in front of the kids. "Grandma, that's not how we do it in this house." The "we" never included me. I remembered Michael's promotion 2 years ago. They had more money. But Jessica seemed more stressed than ever. That was when she started making comments about the house feeling cramped. I heard her on the phone with a friend once. Through the thin wall of my bedroom. I just have no privacy. You know? She'd said. Her voice dripping with frustration. It's like I have a permanent houseguest who is also my free maid. I can't just walk around in my underwear on a Saturday morning. There's always someone there. I was that someone. I was the obstacle to her walking around in her underwear. The realization stung. A fresh wound on top of old scars. Then came the more direct attacks. Disguised as concern. She started talking to Michael about my health. I'm worried about your mom. Honey. She seems to be forgetting things. She'd set me up for failure. She'd ask me to pick up a specific brand of almond milk from the store, knowing they didn't carry it, and then sigh with exasperation when I came home with the wrong one. See, Michael, this is what I'm talking about. Michael, my dear, loving, oblivious son, would just see a squabble between two women he loved. Come on, you do, he'd say, trying to be the peacemaker. It's just milk. Let's not make a big deal out of it. He couldn't see the pattern. He couldn't see the strategy. He just saw his tired mother and his stressed wife, and he didn't want to choose a side. His neutrality became her greatest weapon. The talk of assisted living started about 6 months ago. It began subtly. Jessica would leave brochures on the coffee table, tucked inside magazines. I was reading this interesting article about modern retirement communities. She'd say to no one in particular. They're like luxury resorts. They have swimming pools and movie nights. I ignored it, hoping it would go away. But it only got worse. She started pointing out every little mistake I made as proof of my declining faculties. If I misplaced my reading glasses, it was a senior moment. If I stumbled on the stairs, she'd gasp and say, Eleanor, you have to be more careful. This house isn't safe for you anymore. The most chilling memory came back to me then, floating up from the depths of my subconscious. It was about 2 weeks before the coffee incident. I was in the laundry room, and I overheard her on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was low and urgent. No, didn't work. She'd said. He's still not convinced. He thinks she's perfectly fine. I know. But I can't just keep waiting. We need another plan. Something more definitive. At the time, I assumed she was talking about a project at work. But now, lying in the dark, her words took on a horrifying new meaning. The plan was to convince Michael I was incompetent. When that failed, she moved to plan B. The definitive plan. The cup of coffee. A cold fury began to burn in my chest, melting away the fear. The sheer audacity of it. The cruelty. She wasn't just trying to get me out of her house. She was trying to erase me. To dispose of me like an inconvenient piece of old furniture. I finally understood. I was not just a burden to her. I was a threat. My presence, my good health, my clear mind, they were all obstacles to the life she wanted. A life free of obligation. Free of the old woman at the end of the hall who was a constant, living reminder of the debt she and Michael owed me. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared at my window, I had made a decision. I was not going to be a victim. I would not let her win. Reporting her to the police was not an option. It would be my word against hers. The coffee was gone. The evidence washed down the sink. They would think I was a vindictive, senile old woman. She had been laying the groundwork for that narrative for months. It would destroy Michael's life, tear my family apart, and in the end, I would likely be the one who lost. No, I would not play her game by her rules. I would create my own. I got out of bed. My movements no longer tired or robotic. There was a new purpose in my step. I walked into my bathroom and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the wrinkles, the gray hair, the age spots on my hands. For years, I had seen them as signs of decay, of a life winding down. But that morning, I saw them differently. They were a map of my survival. Every line was a battle I had won, a sorrow I had overcome. I had survived a cheating husband, single motherhood, and financial hardship. I would survive this. I would not run. I would not hide. But I would not stay and wait for the next cup of coffee. I would gather my strength, my wits, and my evidence. I would play the part of Eleanor Vance, the sweet, harmless, slightly forgetful grandmother. But underneath the placid surface, a new Eleanor was being forged, one who was a fighter. The war was not over. It had just begun. And I was determined to be the one left standing. The days that followed the coffee incident were a masterclass in deception. I became the finest actress of my own life. On the outside, I was the same Eleanor. I woke at 5:30. I made the coffee the regular, untampered with kind. I packed the lunches. I smiled at my grandchildren and asked about their day. I was a ghost in the machine of the family, performing my duties with a quiet efficiency that was both my camouflage and my shield. But on the inside, I was a general planning a campaign. Every moment was an opportunity for reconnaissance. Every conversation was a potential source of intelligence. My mind, which Jessica was so eager to prove was failing, had never been sharper. I was fueled by a cold, clarifying anger that burned brighter than any youthful passion I had ever known. Jessica brought her mother home from the hospital 2 days later. The official diagnosis was a severe case of food poisoning, complicated by an allergic reaction to an unknown substance. The doctors had been puzzled but had ultimately shrugged it off. Helen was weak and shaken, but she would recover. She looked at me with pity. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice raspy. "You have to be so careful what you eat at our age. I'm just lucky I have a strong constitution." The irony was a bitter pill I had to swallow without flinching. Jessica was a changed woman. The feigned friendliness was gone, replaced by a tense, watchful hostility. She moved around me with a brittle caution, as if I were a bomb that might detonate at any moment. She avoided being alone in a room with me. When our eyes met, hers were filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. She knew I was a witness to her darkest secret, and she didn't know what I would do with that knowledge. My silence was my power. It unnerved her more than any accusation could. My first move was to secure an ally. I couldn't fight this war alone. There was only one person I trusted enough, Carol, my neighbor and friend of 20 years. Carol had known me before I was Michael's mother. She had sat with me through Robert's long illness, bringing casseroles and gossip in equal measure. She was pragmatic, sharp as a tack, and fiercely loyal. One afternoon, when I knew Jessica was at a work lunch and the kids were at school, I walked over to Carol's house. She opened the door, her face creasing into a warm smile that faltered when she saw my expression. "Eleanor? Good heavens. You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, ushering me inside to her cozy, chintz-filled living room. I sat on her sofa, the floral patterns a stark contrast to the ugliness of the story I was about to tell. I took a deep breath and, for the first time, I let the words out. I told her everything. About the slow, creeping hostility, the comments about my memory, the special coffee, the swap with Helen, Jessica's terrified eyes. Carol listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to shock, and finally to a slow-burning rage. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute, her teacup rattling faintly in its saucer. That little monster," she finally whispered, her voice trembling with indignation. "I never liked her. Too slick, too polished. But this, Eleanor, this is attempted murder." "I have no proof, Carol," I said, my voice flat. "It's my word against hers. And she's been painting me as a confused old woman for months. Who do you think they'll believe?" "I'll tell them," she declared. slamming her cup down. I'll tell them you're saner than I am. I'll be your witness. It's not enough, I insisted, shaking my head. She's smart. She's manipulative. I need more than just character references. I need concrete proof of her intentions. Carol leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. The compassionate friend was gone, replaced by a co-conspirator. All right then, she said, her voice low and determined. Let's get you some proof. What's her next move going to be? She failed with the poison. What's her plan A? The nursing home, I said instantly. The assisted living facility. That was always the original plan. She'll double down on that. She has to get me out of that house before I talk. A sly look came over Carol's face. Well, you know, it's funny you should mention that. Brenda Lee from my book club. Her sister works as a receptionist at the Maple Creek Community Center. And she told me the most interesting thing last week. I leaned in, my heart starting to beat a little faster. What did she tell you? She said Jessica Vance came in a few weeks ago, asking for information. Not for herself, but for an elderly relative who is becoming a danger to herself. She was asking about local support groups for caregivers dealing with parents with dementia. She was putting on a real show. Apparently, crying, even. Said her mother-in-law was starting to wander off and was getting paranoid. The coldness spread through my veins again. But this time it was steel. It was confirmation. Jessica wasn't just lying to Michael. She was building a public case against me. She was creating a paper trail of my supposed decline, seeding the story throughout the community so that when she finally made her move, no one would question it. They would just nod sadly and say, "Oh, poor Jessica. We knew she was struggling with that." Thank you, Carol, I said, my voice tight. This is exactly what I needed to know. What are you going to do? She asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. I'm going to beat her at her own game, I replied. She wants to prove I'm incompetent? I'm going to get a doctor to certify that I'm one of the sanest people he's ever met. The next day, I made an appointment with Dr. Miller, my family physician for over 30 years. I didn't tell Jessica or Michael where I was going. I simply said I was meeting Carol for lunch. The lie came easily to my lips. I was getting good at them. I sat in Dr. Miller's office, the familiar smell of antiseptic in the air. And I told him a modified version of the truth. I didn't mention the poison. It was too incredible, too risky. Instead, I focused on the other part of the plan. Dr. Miller, I began, choosing my words carefully. I'm in a difficult family situation. There are disagreements. And I have a growing fear that my family may try to make decisions for me that I don't agree with, based on the assumption that my mental state is declining with age. He listened patiently, his kind eyes watching me over the top of his glasses. And what do you think? Eleanor? Do you feel your mental state is declining? Absolutely not, I said firmly. I feel as sharp as I did 20 years ago. But I'm an old woman living in my son's house. I have very little power. What I need from you, doctor, is an official, objective assessment. I want you to run every cognitive test you can. I want a full mental health evaluation. And I want it all documented. I need a piece of paper that says I am of sound mind and body, capable of making my own decisions. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw a flicker of deep understanding in his eyes. He had been a doctor in this small town for a long time. He had seen the quiet, ugly side of families. I understand, he said simply. Let's get started. For the next 2 hours, he put me through a battery of tests. I answered questions about current events. I repeated long strings of numbers. I drew clocks. I identified patterns. I recounted detailed memories from my childhood and from the last week. It was exhausting. But I focused with an intensity one hadn't summoned in years. I was fighting for my legal identity, for my very personhood. At the end of it all, dear. Miller leaned back in his chair and smiled. Well, Eleanor, he said, I can tell you this. Your daughter-in-law is wrong. According to every metric I have, your cognitive functions are not just good for a woman of 73. They are excellent for a person of any age. Your memory is better than my receptionist's, and she's 25. I will be happy to write up a full report certifying that you are, without a shadow of a doubt, mentally competent and fully capable of managing your own affairs. Tears of relief pricked my eyes. It was the first concrete victory, the first stone in the foundation of my defense. I thanked him profusely, and he handed me a sealed envelope. You keep this somewhere safe, he said, his tone serious. Hopefully, you'll never need it. But if you do, it's a powerful weapon. I clutched that envelope all the way home like it was a holy relic. It was more than a doctor's report. It was my declaration of independence. I hid the envelope in a small, lockable box at the back of my closet, where I kept old photographs and my late husband's military medals. Felt safe there, among the other sacred relics of my life. That evening, feeling emboldened, I took another risk. Michael worked late on Tuesdays, and Jessica always took a long bath after putting the kids to bed. It was a small window of opportunity. Her office, a small room off the living area, was usually her private sanctuary. I had dusted in there, but I had never snooped. Tonight, that changed. My heart was hammering as I quietly pushed open the door. The room was immaculate. Her desk clear except for a sleek laptop and a single, stylish pen holder. It looked like a room that held no secrets. But I knew better. Secrets weren't left out in the open. They were tucked away. I started with her desk drawers. They were filled with boring office supply staplers, paper clips, branded notepads. Nothing. I moved to the filing cabinet in the corner. The first drawer was labeled household bills, warranties, insurance papers. The second was taxes. I was about to give up when I noticed the third drawer had no label. It was locked. A jolt of adrenaline went through me. This was it. I had to get in there. I looked around the room, my eyes scanning for a key. Nothing. Where would a meticulous, controlling person like Jessica hide a key? Not in a predictable place. Somewhere close, but not obvious. My eyes fell on a small, framed photo on her desk. It was a picture of her and Michael on their wedding day, smiling blissfully. It was a heavy, silver frame. On impulse, picked it up. I ran my fingers along the back. The velvet backing was slightly loose in one corner. My fingernail caught on the edge, and I pulled. The backing came away, and taped to the inside was a small, silver key. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. It clicked open with a soft, metallic sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the silent house. I pulled the drawer open. It wasn't full. It contained only one thing, a thick, manila folder. My name was written on the tab in Jessica's neat, perfect handwriting, Eleanor Vance. My breath caught in my throat. With trembling fingers, I lifted the folder out and opened it on the desk. What I saw made the blood run cold in my veins. The folder was a meticulously compiled portfolio of my planned obsolescence. It was the work of a cold, calculating mind, and seeing it laid out so clinically stole the air from my lungs. This was my midpoint. The moment the war shifted from a defensive struggle for survival to an offensive campaign for justice. This was no longer just about a cup of coffee. This was about the calculated, systematic attempt to erase a human being. The first documents on top were exactly what I had expected. Glossy brochures from several high-end assisted living facilities in and around Ohio. Places with names like Golden Meadows and Serenity Gardens. Jessica had circled the monthly fees on each one, and next to them, she had written notes in her precise script. Memory care unit available. On-site nursing 24/7. Medication management program. She wasn't just browsing. She was comparison shopping for my cage. Beneath the brochures was a printout of a financial worksheet. On one side, she had listed my assets. She had somehow gotten a hold of my bank statements. She had estimated the value of the few pieces of jewelry Robert had left me, the small stock portfolio I had nurtured for decades. On the other side, she had calculated the costs of the facilities, running different scenarios. It was clear she was trying to figure out how to pay for my incarceration using my own money. The cold-bloodedness of it was staggering. I wasn't a person to her. I was a balance sheet, a problem to be solved financially. But the most damning evidence was at the very bottom of the folder. It was a stack of printed emails, a correspondence between Jessica and a man named Martin Gables, from a law firm called Gables & Associates. The subject line of the first email read, "Inquiry regarding geriatric legal options." I sank into her desk chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me, and began to read. "Dear Mr. Gables," Jessica's first email began, dated 3 months ago. "I am writing to you in a difficult and sensitive situation. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance, lives with my family. Over the past year, we have noticed a significant and frightening cognitive decline. She is becoming increasingly forgetful, paranoid, and has begun to wander. Last week, she left the stove on overnight. It is no longer safe for her or for my children to have her living in our home unsupervised. My husband is in denial, unable to accept his mother's condition. I am seeking advice on what legal avenues are available to me to ensure she gets the care she needs, even if it is against her will." The lies were breathtaking in their specificity. The stove incident never happened. The wandering was a complete fabrication. She was constructing a fictional version of me, a dangerously senile old woman, to present to the legal system. The lawyer's reply was professional and chillingly informative. He outlined the process for establishing a legal guardianship or conservatorship over an elderly person deemed incapacitated. He explained the need for medical documentation and affidavits from family members. He mentioned the term involuntary commitment and the legal standards required. But it was Jessica's follow-up emails that truly exposed the depth of her malice. She was actively seeking ways to manufacture the evidence the lawyer required. "Mr. Gables," she wrote in a subsequent email, "the main obstacle is the lack of official medical diagnosis. She refuses to see a specialist, and our family doctor is an old friend of hers who will likely take her side. Are there other forms of proof that would be compelling in court? For instance, if I were to keep a detailed log of her episodes?" Martin Gables' reply was cautious, full of legal disclaimers, but the message was clear. A detailed, consistent journal from a primary caregiver could be considered powerful anecdotal evidence. And then I saw it. The last document in the folder. It was a separate, password-protected document she had printed out. At the top, said, E.V. Incident Log. It was the journal, page after page of fabricated events, each one dated and described in meticulous detail. October 12th. Accused the mailman of stealing her magazines. Became very agitated. Cried for an hour. A lie. I had complimented the mailman on his new truck. October 19th. Got lost walking home from Carol's house. Only 2 doors down. A neighbor had to bring her home. A complete fantasy. November 4th. Found E. in the kitchen at 3 a.m. talking to a photograph of her late husband. She seemed to think he was in the room with her. I was getting a glass of water. I glanced at Robert's photo on the shelf and whispered, "Miss you." That was it. She had taken innocent, everyday moments and twisted them into signs of insanity. She was rewriting my life, day by day, to fit her narrative. This folder, this secret, locked away folder, was the story of my execution. First social, then legal, and, if necessary, as the coffee had proven, physical. I felt a wave of nausea so profound it almost buckled me over. It was the same feeling Helen must have had. But my sickness was not from a chemical. It was from the poison of pure human evil. For a moment, all the fight went out of me, replaced by an overwhelming despair. How could I fight this? This was not just a woman. It was a conspiracy. She had a plan. A lawyer. A manufactured mountain of lies. What did I have? A doctor's note and a loyal friend. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the cold paper of the documents beneath my fingertips. Then, I heard the faint sound of the bathtub draining upstairs. My time was running out. Panic gave way to a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. She was not going to win. This folder was not my death sentence. It was my weapon. My hand stopped shaking. A new, icy calm settled over me. I took out my phone. My movements now swift and sure. I propped the folder open on the desk. One by one, I took crystal clear photographs of every single page. The brochures. The financial worksheet. Every email between Jessica and the lawyer. Every single entry in her poison pen journal. I photographed the folder itself, with my name on the tab. I even photographed the key taped to the back of the wedding picture. I checked each photo, making sure it was legible. Then I sent them all to a new, secure email address I had created for this very purpose. An address only I and now Carol knew. I watched the progress bar as the files uploaded to the cloud. A digital lifeline. Once they were sent, I deleted the photos from my phone's gallery and from the recently deleted folder. I placed every paper back in the folder in the exact order I had found it. I closed the folder, slid it back into the drawer, and locked it with the small silver key. I taped the key back behind the wedding photo, pressing the velvet backing firmly into place. I pushed the chair back under the desk, making sure it was exactly as I had found it. I stood in the doorway, my heart still pounding, and took one last look around the room. I had been in there for maybe 15 minutes, but in that time, the entire landscape of my life had changed. I was no longer just a victim of a failed murder plot. I was the keeper of a truth so explosive it could shatter this entire family, this entire house, this entire life she had so carefully constructed. I closed the office door with a soft click and walked back to my room, just as I heard Jessica's footsteps on the stairs. My hands were cold, but my heart was on fire. I now had the ammunition. All I needed was to choose my battlefield. The next morning, I began my subtle counteroffensive. It was no longer enough to be a silent observer. It was time to play the game. I started small. During breakfast, while Jessica was scrolling through her phone, and Michael was rushing to get out the door, I made an announcement. I had the most wonderful chat with Dr. Miller yesterday. I said cheerfully to no one in particular. Jessica's head snapped up from her phone. Her eyes narrowed. You went to the doctor? Is everything all right? Her voice was laced with a suspicious hope. Oh, everything is more than all right, I said, beaming. I just thought, at my age, it's good to have a full checkup. A baseline. And he said I'm in remarkable health. Sharp as a tack. He said. He even did one of those memory tests. Said I did better than his 25-year-old receptionist. I laughed. A light, airy sound that was completely manufactured. I watched Jessica's face. A flicker of panic crossed her features before she smoothed it over with a tight smile. Oh, well, that's wonderful news, Eleanor. I had just fired my first warning shot. I had let her know, in the most pleasant way possible, that her narrative was falling apart. The confused old woman had just been certified as mentally fit by a medical professional. Check. Later that week, I escalated my psychological warfare. I knew Jessica was terrified that I would talk about the coffee incident, so I started talking about it, but in a way she couldn't challenge. I brought it up with Carol when I knew Jessica was in the next room, well within earshot. It's just terrifying what happened to poor Helen, I said loudly, my voice full of fake sympathy. Food poisoning can be so unpredictable. You know, I read an article online that said some kinds of toxins can be mistaken for food poisoning. Things that are odorless and tasteless. Can you imagine? Someone could put something in your drink and you'd never even know. I heard a sharp intake of breath from the living room, followed by the sound of a magazine being snapped shut. I smiled to myself. I was planting seeds of fear in her own mind. I was letting her know that I knew it wasn't shrimp salad. My final move of the week was the boldest. I found a newspaper article about a recent court case where an elderly man had successfully sued his children for trying to declare him incompetent to steal his inheritance. It was a juicy, dramatic story. I cut it out neatly. That evening, when the family was sitting in the living room, I found the clipping. Oh, look at this, I said, as if I just discovered it. I must have torn this out to read later. What a terrible story. I proceeded to read the entire article aloud, my voice full of shock and disapproval. I emphasized the parts about the fabricated evidence, the lying children, and the triumphant old man who won his freedom and his fortune back. When I finished, there was a heavy silence in the room. Michael just looked uncomfortable, but Jessica was staring at me, her face pale, her eyes wide. She looked like a trapped animal. She knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't just reading an article. I was reading her the future. I was showing her the script to a play in which she was the villain, and I was making it clear that I knew exactly how it ended. The power dynamic in the house had irrevocably shifted. The fear was no longer just mine. I had managed to transfer a large portion of it back to its rightful owner. She had started this war. But I was beginning to realize, with a thrilling and terrifying certainty, that I was the one who was going to finish it. The psychological battle escalated. The house, once a place of simmering, unspoken tension, now crackled with it. It was a cold war fought in the spaces between words, in shared glances over the dinner table, and in the deliberate placement of newspaper clippings. I had seized the offensive, and Jessica was reeling. Her confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous, twitchy energy. She started watching me with a paranoid intensity, trying to anticipate my next move. The hunter had become the hunted. My grandchildren, Isabel and Peter, were caught in the crossfire. They were too young to understand the specifics, but they were sensitive enough to feel the shift in the emotional climate. The house no longer felt like a home, felt like a stage, and the adults were all playing parts they didn't enjoy. Jessica, in her desperation, tried a new tactic. She attempted to turn the children against me. It was a cruel, cowardly move, and it was the one that hurt me the most. She started small, undermining my authority in subtle ways. "Grandma lets you have too much sugar," she'd say to Peter, snatching away the cookie I had just given him. "Mommy knows what's best." She began to forget to tell me about school events. I missed Isabel's parent-teacher conference and Peter's band concert because I simply wasn't told about them until it was too late. When I'd express my disappointment, Jessica would put on a show of remorse. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm so sorry." Completely slipped my mind. "I've just been so stressed lately." But the look in her eyes was one of cold triumph. She was isolating me, cutting off my emotional lifelines one by one. The children became confused. They loved me, but their mother was systematically teaching them not to trust me. "Don't bother Grandma with that, honey," she'd say. "She's very tired today." Or, "Be quiet around Grandma. She has a headache." I was perfectly fine, but she was painting me as a fragile, irritable old woman who was best left alone. This was a pain far sharper than the fear of any poison. To have the love of my grandchildren weaponized against me was a unique form of torture. It was during this period that I realized I couldn't stay. Even if I won the war, the battlefield would be a ruin. The family would be shattered, and my relationship with my son and grandchildren would be forever tainted by the conflict. My victory couldn't be about destroying Jessica. It had to be about saving myself. And to do that, I had to leave. But I would not be driven out. I would not be carted off to Serenity Gardens. I would walk out on my own 2 feet, with my head held high. And to do that, I needed a plan. My first step was to discreetly assess my financial situation. For 3 years, I had been contributing my modest pension and Social Security checks to the household expenses, as Jessica had insisted it was only fair. I hadn't looked at my own bank account in ages. I was afraid of what I would find, or what I wouldn't. One morning, I told the family I was going to a church bake sale with Carol. Instead, Carol drove me to the downtown branch of my bank. I sat down with a kind young man named David, who pulled up my accounts. My heart was in my throat. My entire future depended on the numbers on his screen. He turned the monitor towards me. "Well, Mrs. Vance," he said with a smile, "you're in very good shape." I stared at the screen, my eyes blurring with unshed tears. It was more than I had dared to hope for. The money from the sale of my old house, which I had insisted be kept in a separate investment account in my name only, had been quietly growing for years. Robert had been a cautious man, and his planning was now my salvation. I wasn't rich by any means, but I had enough. Enough to be independent. Enough to rent a small apartment, pay my own bills, and live with dignity. I had David print out a full statement. It was another piece of my arsenal, another declaration of my competence and autonomy. As I walked out of the bank, clutching that statement in my purse next to Dr. Miller's report, I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just Eleanor, the live-in grandmother. I was Eleanor Vance, a woman of independent means. The final piece of my plan required professional help. I couldn't just rely on Carol's righteous anger and my own wits. I needed to understand my legal rights. The next day, Carol drove me to a neighboring town to meet with a lawyer she had found for me. Her name was Sarah Jennings, a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I sat in her quiet, book-lined office and, for the second time, I told my story. This time, I left nothing out. The poison, the folder, the psychological warfare. As I spoke, I laid my evidence on her polished mahogany desk, the copy of Dr. Miller's report, the bank statement, and finally, I pulled out my phone and showed her the pictures of Jessica's folder. Sarah scrolled through the images, her expression growing grimmer with each one. She read the emails, the fabricated incident log. When she was done, she looked up at me, and there was a look of profound respect in her eyes. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "you are a very strong woman, and you are in a very dangerous situation." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here. I don't want to press charges. I don't want to go to the police. That would destroy my son. I just want to get out. But I want to do it in a way that protects me, now and in the future." "You have significant leverage," Sarah explained, tapping a finger on the picture of the lawyer's email on my phone. "What your daughter-in-law has done here, conspiring to commit fraud, creating false documents to influence a court, is highly illegal. And the coffee incident, that's a whole other level. You may not want to go to the police, but the threat of it is a powerful negotiating tool." She laid out a strategy. It was brilliant in its simplicity. I wouldn't confront Michael with the whole, ugly truth. It would crush him. Instead, I would confront Jessica directly. I would let her know the full extent of the evidence I possessed. I would make it clear that I had the power to ruin her life, to send her to prison. And then, I would offer her a deal. My silence in exchange for her full cooperation in my departure. She would not contest my moving out. She would not try to stop me or interfere in any way. She would agree to a formal, notarized document, drafted by Sarah, stating that I was moving out of my own free will, and that she and Michael relinquished any and all future claims to make legal or medical decisions on my behalf. It was, Sarah said, a postnuptial agreement for a relationship that was never a marriage. It was a document of disengagement. The thought of confronting Jessica directly terrified me. The woman who had tried to kill me, who had plotted to steal my freedom. But Sarah's confidence was contagious. She thinks you're a weak, helpless old woman, Sarah said, her eyes glinting. It's time to show her who you really are. The confrontation came 2 days later. The air in the house was thick with unspoken animosity. Michael was away on a 2-day business trip. The children were at school. It was just me and Jessica. It was the perfect time. The battlefield was set. I found her in the kitchen, wiping down the already spotless granite countertops. Her movements were tense and agitated. She looked up as I entered, her body stiffening. Jessica, I said, my voice calm and even. I had practiced this. I would not let it tremble. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, she snapped, turning her back to me. I think you do, I said, walking further into the room. I stood on the other side of the kitchen island, the same island where she had served me the poisoned coffee. The symbolism was not lost on me. I think you have a great deal to say about this. I placed my phone on the counter and slid it across the polished stone towards her. On the screen was a clear photograph of her EV incident log. She stared at the phone. Her face went completely white. For a moment, I thought she might faint. She looked from the phone to my face, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. The mask of the sophisticated, in-control suburban wife shattered into 1,000 pieces. What was left was ugly, raw, and terrified. Where did you get that? She stammered. From your locked file drawer, I said calmly. The one labeled Eleanor Vance. I also have photos of the brochures for the nursing homes, the financial worksheets where you calculated how to spend my money, and my personal favorite, all the emails between you and your lawyer, Mr. Gables, where you conspired to have me declared incompetent. Her composure completely crumbled. You have no right, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. That's my private property. You can't do this. You seem to be confused about rights, Jessica, I said, my voice dropping lower, colder. Did I have the right to not have poison put in my coffee? Did your own mother have that right? You see, you started a war when you did that. You just didn't realize your opponent wasn't the weak old woman you thought I was. I let the words hang in the air. I watched the fight drain out of her, replaced by a dawning, sickening realization of how badly she had miscalculated. What do you want? She finally whispered, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. It's very simple, I said, leaning forward slightly. I want out. I am moving out of this house. I am going to live my own life. And you are going to help me. Jessica stared at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to find an angle, a way to twist this back in her favor. Move out? Michael will never allow it. He'll think you're not safe on your own. He'll worry. It was a weak, desperate gambit. An attempt to use my son as a shield one last time. Oh, think he will, I said, my voice dangerously soft. Because you are going to convince him it's a wonderful idea. You are going to tell him that I am a vibrant, independent woman who deserves her own space. You are going to say that you were wrong to be so worried. And that after seeing how well I've been doing, you think this is the best thing for everyone. You are going to be my biggest cheerleader, Jessica. Because the alternative is that I show him this folder. And the police. Do you know what the penalty is for attempted murder? The color drained completely from her face. The words hung in the air, stark and ugly. It was the first time either of us had named the crime aloud. Her bluff had been called. Her entire world reduced to a single binary choice, her freedom or her pride. She sank onto one of the kitchen stools, her designer pantsuit suddenly looking like a costume on a deflated doll. The fight was over. I had won. What do I have to do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't look at me. She stared at the pristine granite countertop as if the answers were written there. Tomorrow, I began, laying out my terms like a conquering general. A document will be delivered here from my lawyer. You will sign it. Michael will sign it. It will state, for the record, that I am moving out of my own accord, that I am of sound mind, and that you both permanently waive any right to act as my legal guardians or make medical decisions on my behalf. Protects me from you ever trying a stunt like this again. She flinched at the word stunt, but remained silent. Second, I continued, you will make the process of my leaving seamless. You will not create drama. You will not shed a single tear in front of Michael. You will present a united front with me. We are two women who have decided this is for the best. Is that clear? She gave a short, jerky nod. And finally, I said, delivering the coup de grace, you will never, ever, speak ill of me to my grandchildren again. You will encourage their relationship with me. You will drive them to my new home for visits. You will treat me with respect in their presence. My relationship with them is not negotiable. If you violate that, Jessica, promise you, all our deals are off. I have made copies of everything. The evidence will not disappear. That was the one that made her look up. Her eyes were full of a venomous, impotent rage. I had taken everything from her, her plan, her power, and now, control over the narrative she presented to her own children. She was trapped, and she knew it. Fine. She spat out, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. Fine. The next few days were surreal. When Michael returned from his trip, Jessica played her part to perfection. She was a picture of supportive, enlightened understanding. Honey, she said to him over dinner, her voice smooth as silk. Your mother and I have been talking. And I think we've been selfish. She's given so much to us. But she's so full of life. She needs her own space, her own friends. She deserves a life of her own. Michael looked from her to me, his brow furrowed in confusion. But, I thought you were worried about her? The memory thing? Jessica gave a self-deprecating little laugh. Oh, that. I was being an overprotective worrywart. Honestly, she's sharper than I am. I think having her here, maybe it was more for our benefit than for hers. It's time we let her fly. It was a masterful performance. I had to give her credit. She spun a beautiful story of my independence and their loving decision to set me free. Michael, bless his heart, bought every word of it. He was so relieved that the tension between his wife and his mother was apparently resolved that he didn't question the sudden reversal. He looked at me, his eyes full of love and a little bit of guilt. Mom, is this what you really want? He asked. Yes, sweetheart, I said, reaching across the table to pat his hand. I gave him a genuine, warm smile. It's time. I'm not getting any younger, and I want to have a little adventure of my own. The legal document arrived the next day. Sarah had drafted it perfectly. It was simple, clear, and ironclad. I presented it to them that evening. It's just a formality, I said breezily. My lawyer insisted, just to make sure everything is clear and there are no misunderstandings down the road. Michael read it and shrugged. Seemed straightforward enough. He signed it without a second thought. Then it was Jessica's turn. I watched her as she took the pen. Her hand was trembling slightly. She pressed the tip to the paper. Her signature a spiky, angry slash across the page. It was the signature of a defeated woman. As she signed her name, she was signing away her power over me forever. With the legalities settled, I began my preparations in earnest. I found a small, one-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex on the other side of town. It had a small balcony perfect for a flower box. It was clean, bright, and blessedly empty. It was a blank canvas. Carol was my co-conspirator and logistics manager. We made secret trips to thrift stores and furniture shops, buying a comfortable armchair, a small dining table, a new bed. We bought colorful new dishes and fluffy towels. Each purchase was an act of joyful rebellion. I was not just escaping a prison. I was building a home. A real one. Mine. The packing was the hardest part. 3 years of my life were condensed into a handful of boxes. Most of what was in the house wasn't mine. My life had been reduced to the contents of a single guest room. Packed my books, my photos, the lockbox with my precious evidence, and the Bluebell mug. I washed it carefully and wrapped it in tissue paper. It was a spoil of war. A reminder of the battle I had won. The day of the move was a Saturday. I had hired a small moving truck for the few pieces of furniture Carol and I had bought. Carol arrived early, her face beaming. D-Day. She whispered to me with a conspiratorial wink. The atmosphere in the house was heavy with unspoken things. Michael was quiet and sad. A deep melancholy in his eyes. He was losing his mother again, and he felt a profound, unnameable guilt about it. I hugged him tightly. This isn't goodbye. I told him. This is just hello to something new. We'll see each other all the time. The children were confused. Peter kept asking why I had to leave. Aren't we your family? He asked, his lower lip trembling. I knelt and held his small face in my hands. You are my heart. I told him. And you can come and visit my new house anytime you want. We'll have our own special place. Isabel, on the cusp of being a teenager, was more withdrawn. She just gave me a fierce, long hug, and I could feel her thin shoulders shaking. Jessica stood apart from it all, a silent observer by the window. She watched the movers carry out my boxes, her arms crossed over her chest. Her face was a blank mask, but I could see the simmering resentment in her eyes. She was a queen deposed in her own castle, forced to watch as the source of all her problems simply walked away, victorious and unscathed. When the last box was on the truck, I took a final look around the house that had been my home and my prison. I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and exhilarating freedom. I was leaving behind so much pain, but I was also leaving behind the daily presence of my son and grandchildren. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. Carol was waiting for me in her car. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw them standing on the porch, Michael and the kids, waving sadly. And behind them, in the shadow of the doorway, stood Jessica, motionless, watching me go. We drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Carol reached over and patted my hand. You did it, Eleanor, she said softly. You really did it. A single tear rolled down my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief, of release, of a profound and deeply earned peace. The war was over. I had survived. Now, the rest of my life was waiting to begin. The first week in my new apartment felt like waking from a long, suffocating dream. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't the empty, lonely silence I had feared. It was a peaceful, healing quiet. There were no footsteps in the hall to put me on edge. No sudden voices that made my shoulders tense. The only sounds were the ones I chose. The gentle hum of the refrigerator, the chirping of birds on my balcony, the classical music station I played on a small radio. Unpacking was a ceremony of reclamation. Each object I placed on a shelf was a statement of my existence. I arranged my books not in alphabetical order, but by the comfort they brought me. I put the photos of Robert, Michael, and the kids on the mantelpiece. And in the center of my new, small kitchen table. I placed the bluebell mug. It sat there not as a grim reminder, but as a trophy, a symbol of my resilience. I established new routines that belonged only to me. I woke up not to an alarm, but when the sun told me to. Some days it was 6 a.m. Others it was 7:30. I would make myself a single, perfect cup of coffee, never vanilla, and sit on my balcony, watching the world wake up. I had spent so many years tending to the needs of others that I had forgotten the simple, profound pleasure of tending to my own. I joined the local community garden. Eleanor Vance, who had only ever been allowed to weed Jessica's perfectly manicured flower beds, was now in charge of my own plot of earth. I plunged my hands into the rich, dark soil, planting tomatoes, zucchini, and a defiant row of marigolds. I met other gardeners, people my own age who talked about their lives, their children, their travels. They didn't see me as Michael's mother or a live-in helper. They just saw me as Eleanor. Carol and I became inseparable. We had lunch twice a week. We went to afternoon movies. We explored little towns we'd always meant to visit. I was rediscovering the woman I had been before I had moved into that house, a woman with her own thoughts, her own interests, her own friends. A woman who laughed loudly and had opinions on politics. My relationship with my son and grandchildren began to transform. The distance, paradoxically, brought us closer. Our time together was no longer a default setting. It was intentional. It was chosen. Michael would call me every other day, just to talk. He stopped seeing me through the lens of Jessica's complaints and started seeing me as a person again. He'd ask for my advice, tell me about his work, and actually listen to my answers. The children came to visit every Saturday. That first Saturday, Michael dropped them off, and I saw the apprehension in their eyes. They were entering my world now, a place that had no connection to their mother. I had baked cookies, the sugary kind Jessica hated, and we ate them right out of the oven. We played board games on the floor of my living room. We sat on the balcony and I told them stories about their grandfather. Stories I had never had the space to tell them before. Peter, my sweet, serious grandson, looked around my small, cozy apartment. I like it here, Grandma, he said quietly. It's calm. From the mouth of a 13-year-old boy. It was the highest compliment I could have received. He felt it, too. The absence of fear. The presence of peace. Jessica, true to her word, did not interfere. She drove the kids, picked them up, and our exchanges were civil, brief, and cold. She was holding up her end of the bargain because she had no other choice. The unspoken threat of my evidence hung between us, a permanent ceasefire line. For several months, this new life unfolded in a rhythm of quiet joy and healing. I felt the tight knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for 3 years finally begin to loosen. I was sleeping through the night. I was happy. Then, one Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was strained, heavy. Mom? Can I come over? I need to talk. Of course, sweetheart, I said, my old maternal instincts kicking in. Is everything all right? No, he said, his voice cracking slightly. No, it's not. He arrived 20 minutes later. He looked exhausted, older than his years. The confident man I knew had been replaced by someone lost and burdened. I made him a cup of tea, and he sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the bluebell mug. Jessica and I were having problems. He began, his voice low. Bad problems. I stayed silent, letting him speak. I had a feeling I knew where this was going. Since you left, he continued, struggling to find the words. Things have been different. I thought it would make her happy, you know? Having the house to herself. But she's changed. Or maybe she was always like this and I just didn't see it. He told me that Jessica had become distant, irritable, and reckless. With me gone, there was no one to do the invisible work that kept the household running. The laundry piled up. The fridge was often empty. The house was a mess. When he tried to talk to her about it, she exploded, accusing him of being ungrateful and treating her like a maid. "She's out all the time," he said, rubbing his tired eyes. "With her friends. She comes home late, smelling of wine. She's spending money like crazy. I looked at our credit card statement last week. Thousands of dollars on clothes, bodies, lunches I knew nothing about." He paused, and the next words came out in a pained rush. "I think she's seeing someone, Mom." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading for an answer, for some explanation for how his perfect life had so quickly unraveled. "It's like, with you gone, there's no one for her to blame anymore," he said, the realization dawning on him slowly, painfully. All the things she said were bothering her: the lack of space, the stress. It was all an excuse. You weren't the problem. You were just in the way. In the way of what? I thought. In the way of this. In the way of her true self. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't reveal the full, ugly truth about the poison or the folder. What would be the point? It would only pour salt on his already gaping wound. He was discovering the truth about his wife on his own. All I needed to do was be there for him. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Oh, Michael," I said softly. "I'm so sorry." He broke down then, the strong son I had raised, and wept at his mother's kitchen table. I held his hand and let him cry, my heart aching for his pain, but also feeling a sense of grim, inevitable closure. The foundation of their life together had been built on a lie: the lie of Jessica's contentment, the lie that I was the source of all her unhappiness. Once that foundation was removed, the entire structure had begun to collapse. She had used me as her scapegoat for so long that without me, her own dysfunctions, her own selfishness and cruelty, were laid bare for everyone, including her husband, to see. She had wanted me gone so she could be free. And now she was free to be the person she truly was. And that person was destroying my son's life. My act of self-preservation had inadvertently become an act of revelation, shining a harsh, unforgiving light on the truth of their marriage. The queen was alone in her castle, and she was setting it on fire. The end of Michael and Jessica's marriage was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, painful demolition. Michael's discovery of her affair was the final blow to a structure that was already crumbling. The confrontation was ugly. Jessica, with nothing left to lose, dropped all pretense. She was no longer the martyred suburban wife. She was a cornered animal, lashing out with cruel words and bitter accusations. She told Michael he was boring, that he hadn't lived up to his potential, that she had felt trapped for years. She admitted to the affair without a hint of remorse. There was no apology, only defiance. In her version of the story, she was the victim, and leaving him was an act of liberation. 2 weeks later, she packed her bags and left. She didn't just leave Michael. She left her children. She moved into a sleek, downtown apartment with her new partner, transitioning from devoted mother to child-free urbanite, with a speed that was breathtaking. The children were devastated. Their mother had not just moved out. She had vanished from their daily lives, replaced by sporadic, guilt-ridden phone calls and expensive gifts sent by courier. The house in Maple Creek, once Jessica's pristine castle, became a sad, hollow place. Michael, navigating his own grief and the complex logistics of being a single father, was overwhelmed. I stepped in, not as a live-in solution, but as a grandmother. I would go over in the afternoons to help with homework, to cook a proper meal, to provide a stable, loving presence in the chaotic aftermath of their family's implosion. One afternoon, While I was helping Peter with his math homework at the kitchen island, Michael came home early. He was carrying a cardboard box. He looked pale and grim. "I was cleaning out the desk in the office," he said, his voice flat. He placed the box on the counter. "I found this." He lifted the lid. Inside was the manila folder. My name was still written on the tab in Jessica's perfect script. My heart stopped. I had assumed she would have destroyed it. But in her haste to leave, in her arrogance, she had forgotten it. Fatal mistake. Michael's hands were shaking as he lifted out the contents. The brochures, the financial worksheets, and the printed emails between Jessica and the lawyer. He read them, his face growing paler with every word. Then he got to the incident log. He read the fabricated stories, the twisted accounts of my supposed dementia. He looked up at me. His eyes filled with a dawning horror that was almost too painful to witness. He was finally seeing the full scope of the plot. He was seeing the woman he had loved, not as a flawed person, but as a monster. She was going to have you committed. He whispered, the words catching in his throat. All those times, the arguments about your memory, it was all a lie. A plan. He sank onto a stool, the papers rustling in his trembling hands. "Oh, my God. Mom, what she was doing to you," while I just stood by. This was the moment I could have told him everything. The moment I could have shown him the photos on my phone and told him about the coffee, about Helen, about the true, murderous depth of his ex-wife's desperation. But as I looked at my son's shattered face, at the profound pain and self-recrimination in his eyes, I knew I couldn't. He had suffered enough. The truth he held in his hands was already a life-altering burden. The full truth might break him completely. What good would it do now? Jessica was gone. I was safe. Vengeance felt like a hollow prize. So, I made a choice. I chose mercy. I walked over to him and gently took the papers from his hands. "It's over, Michael," I said softly. "She's gone. I'm fine. We're all fine. But I didn't protect you." He choked out, his voice thick with shame. "She was my wife. I should have seen it. I should have protected you." "You can't see what you're not meant to see," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "Her deception wasn't about you, Michael. It was about her. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Now, your only job is to protect them." I nodded toward Peter, who was watching us with wide, worried eyes. I took the box, with all its poisonous contents, walked out the back door, and placed it in the outdoor incinerator bin. I lit a match and dropped it inside. I stood there and watched as the smoke curled up into the evening sky, carrying away the last tangible evidence of Jessica's war against me. It was an ending she didn't deserve, a quiet expunging of her crimes. But it was a peace my family desperately needed. In the months that followed, we began to build a new kind of family. Michael, with a new clarity and purpose, sold the big, cold house in Maple Creek. It was full of too many ghosts. He bought a smaller, warmer house just a few streets away from my apartment. It had a big backyard for Peter and a quiet room for Isabel to do her art. Our lives found a new, gentler rhythm. I was a constant, happy presence in their lives, but I was not their keeper. I was Grandma, the one who brought over soup when they were sick, who attended every school play and band concert, who listened without judgment. I had my own home to return to, my own friends, my own garden. My love for them was no longer tangled up in duty or obligation. It was pure. I am back on my porch swing now, where this story began. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My petunias are thriving. My life is small, and it is quiet, and it is entirely my own. I think about the woman I was 3 years ago, the one who believed that love meant endless sacrifice, that kindness meant erasing her own needs. I feel a great deal of compassion for her. She didn't know her own strength. The coffee incident was a terrible, violent awakening. But it forced me to open my eyes. It forced me to choose myself. I didn't set out to destroy my son's marriage. I set out to save my own life. But in doing so, I revealed a truth that was festering just below the surface. My departure didn't cause the collapse. It simply removed the last pillar holding up a rotten structure. My mother was right. There is a fine line between being kind and being a fool. And sometimes, the only way to find that line is to be pushed right up against it. Life taught me that true kindness, the most profound and lasting kind, has to start with yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You have to protect your own vessel. Because in the end, your life, your dignity, and your peace are the only things you truly own. My story is not one of vengeance, but of liberation. It's a story about the quiet, fierce power that can be found in the second half of life. It's a testament to the fact that it is never, ever too late to stand up, to fight for your own worth, and to build a new beginning from the ashes of what was. In my place, what would you do?